So when you think about classic stadium rock,
Mm.
those huge 70s and 80s guitar heroes.
Yeah, the big hair, the massive stages, the whole spectacle.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And what you're really picturing, what you're hearing in your head, is this gigantic wall of sound.
for sure.
And that sound came from, huge stacks of amplifiers, heavy speaker cabinets,
And a whole bunch of pedals on the floor.
a whole bunch. If a guitarist wanted to switch from, say, a light, clean sound to a really heavy fuzz, they needed a separate, bulky analog pedal for every single effect.
And that was a huge, fragile, and honestly, a really unpredictable setup. The core shift, the thing that defines modern rock music, happened when engineers figured out how to digitize sound.
What does that actually mean, to digitize sound?
Well, they took the physical sound waves, the actual vibrations in the air, and they found a way to turn them into pure data, just numbers and computer code.
Okay.
And that immediately meant the equipment got way smaller, and it could hold the knowledge of dozens of different effects inside a single little chip.
That move from physical boxes to digital code really changed the whole game. And here's why it matters to you. Those same Pro Tools that bands use to fill arenas,
Mm-hmm.
they're now packaged into software that can run on a totally standard home computer. The barrier to making high-quality rock music has pretty much vanished.
Yeah, absolutely. So our mission today is to explore how this digital revolution really changed the sound of rock. We'll focus on the key effects and the tech that made modern music possible and accessible for everyone.
Let's start with creating space, with creating sound environments, because that feels like the first massive problem digital processing solved. I'm talking about delay and reverb.
Right. And delay is probably the simpler one to grasp. It just records a short snippet of audio like a single guitar chord and plays it back milliseconds later.
It creates an echo, basically.
It creates an echo.
Right.
And historically, this was done with magnetic tape, like physically running on a loop between different playback heads.
Wow, sounds really clunky.
It was brilliant for its time, but yeah, it needed constant maintenance, the tape wore out, and it produced a lot of noise.
But with digital chips, that playback becomes incredibly precise, right? They record the sound as data, which means they can repeat it with perfect clarity.
Perfect clarity. And if you set those repeats to loop a few times, you get that classic vast canyon sound,
Right.
where the echo just trails off into the distance. It lets one single guitar sound like it's filling a massive empty room.
And that precision gives musicians a huge practical advantage. I'm thinking of the tap tempo feature.
Oh, that's a classic example, yeah. Imagine the drummer's playing a beat and the guitarist needs the echoes to land perfectly in time.
Instead of fiddling with a tiny knob.
Exactly. Modern digital pedals just let the player tap their foot or a button to set the delay speed. It physically locks the effect into the song's rhythm. It's essential for artists like, The Edge from U2, who build their sound on those rhythmic echoes.
So if delay creates that sense of distance, reverb creates the room itself.
Mm-hmm. Reverb is the really complex sound you hear when sound waves bounce off everything, the walls, the ceiling, the furniture, before they get to your ear.
It's what tells your brain if you're in a tiny closet or a giant sports arena.
Exactly. And digital processing lets musicians just skip the real world and jump straight into a virtual one. Digital reverb lets you pretend you're playing in a huge cathedral or a tiny club. It adds the depth and warmth our ears expect.
Without it, music sounds really
Dry. Incredibly dry and just sort of flat.
So we're not just talking about simulating an echo, we're talking about simulating physics.
We are. The processors use these complex mathematical algorithms to model exactly how sound waves would react to different materials, like how they'd bounce off glass versus how they'd be absorbed by velvet.
That's incredible. So you can just change the size of the virtual room with a knob.
Instantly. You can go from a small club sound to a massive hall sound faster than you can stand up, which is, a lot easier than moving the entire band and all their gear to a new building.
That efficiency has to save so much time in the studio. Okay, so moving on from spaces, let's get to the sound that really defines rock music. Distortion. That aggressive, gritty tone. It started as an accident, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It happened when early musicians pushed their analog tube amplifiers past their limits, on purpose or by accident.
You were just turning them up too loud.
Exactly. Overheating the vacuum tubes inside created this compressed, fuzzy, aggressive sound that we now call overdrive or distortion. It was literally the gear protesting.
So if that classic sound came from a physical failure, a flaw, how does digital tech recreate that flaw so well?
That's the key. Digital technology doesn't just make the sound louder. It uses code to meticulously model the nonlinear flaws of that original analog circuit. And a huge part of this is something called impulse responses, or IRs.
Yeah, what's an impulse response?
Think of it like a super detailed digital photograph of a sound. An IR captures the unique character of not just the amplifier, but also the specific speaker cabinet it's playing through.
You mean like the wood it's made of?
The wood, the size, even the exact type of microphone used to record it and where it was placed. So you can run a clean guitar signal through that digital IR, and what comes out is the $1 million sound of a vintage amp recorded by a top producer, all happening inside a piece of software.
That's a massive leap. And the practical benefit, I mean, you can get that huge heavy metal sound at a whisper.
Absolutely. Guitarists can practice at home with a full-on, heavily distorted tone without bothering the neighbors or, more importantly, damaging their hearing. But this also brings up a really interesting philosophical point.
Which is?
Consistency versus chance. Analog distortion was wonderfully unpredictable. Sometimes the tubes were hotter and you'd get these magical, once-in-a-lifetime recorded takes.
A happy accident.
Right. Digital distortion gives you the exact same amount of grit perfectly every single night on tour. It trades that spark of analog randomness for absolute sonic reliability.
And that's a trade-off a lot of modern touring bands are happy to make.
Okay, let's talk about how digital tools can make one musician sound like a whole army. I'm thinking of pitch and modulation.
This is why the power of digital signal processing really shines.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all done by these specialized computer chips, often just called DSPs, that are dedicated to doing audio math.
Right, and the most direct example is probably pitch shifting, which lets a musician change the note they're playing without actually moving their fingers.
Correct. The processor can take a normal guitar signal and instantly shift it up or down a full octave. So a regular electric guitar can suddenly sound like a deep, rumbling bass or a super high-pitched bell-like sound. It just massively expands the sonic options.
And then there's the really cinematic use for it, which is automated harmony.
Yes. The device can analyze the note being played and then instantly generate a second or even a third note to create a perfect, musically correct harmony.
So one guitarist sounds like three, playing in perfect unison.
Exactly. You get these huge anthemic solos instantly. And we should probably mention pitch correction is everywhere in modern rock vocals, too.
It really is. Singers use it subtly to make sure every single note is perfectly in tune for the final record. It ensures a professional sound, but it is part of that debate about whether perfect vocals sometimes lose some of the raw emotion that defined early rock.
It's technology defining perfection for us. So from perfect pitch, let's go to movement effects, things like chorus and flanging.
Right. Chorus is designed to make one instrument sound like a whole group. It does that by making several copies of the sound and then slightly detuning and delaying each copy.
And that gives you that shimmering, almost watery texture.
The quintessential 80s guitar and synth sound. Yeah.
And flanging takes that even further. It creates that swirling, whooshing sound, almost like a jet plane flying overhead. I think Van Halen's Unchained is probably the most famous example of that ever.
Oh, for sure. Undeniably. And the digital advantage here isn't just about sound quality, it's about control. Digital chips let you make incredibly precise adjustments to the speed and depth of all that swirling. And the digital units are way quieter and more reliable than the old analog versions, which has a ton of background noise.
So we've covered the individual effects. But what about the tools that brought the entire professional recording studio into the home? This is where the whole democratization idea really hits. And it starts with software plugins.
Okay, so a software plugin is basically a digital app that runs inside your computer's recording program, which is called a digital audio workstation, or DAW.
It's like a virtual piece of studio equipment.
Exactly. Before plugins, you needed these gigantic, expensive, physical racks of hardware that filled entire rooms just to get these sounds.
And the cost difference is it's staggering. A single vintage analog compressor could cost tens of thousands of dollars, way out of reach for a young band.
But now, a whole suite of professional plugins that mimic those exact same vintage sounds, thanks to that IR and modeling tech we talked about, might cost a few $100s.
Yeah.
And you can run it all on a normal laptop.
It's lowered the cost of making a radio-ready rock album from, say, $250,000 to something you could do on a student budget.
And the workflow is so much better. I mean, producers can mix albums on a tour bus or in a bedroom. Software lets you undo and edit infinitely, which just speeds up the creative process. It's why so many huge bands now come straight out of home setups.
And for live performance, you see this with sampling.
Right. Sampling is just taking a small piece of an existing recording, a drum beat, a sound effect, whatever, and using it in a new song.
This completely blew the doors open for rock. Bands started using digital samplers to bring in sounds from way outside the normal guitar-based drums world.
You mean like recordings of thunderstorms or spoken word clips or deep synth pads? And musicians can trigger all those complex sounds live on stage using keyboards or electronic drum pads? Modern digital memory is so huge, a sampler can hold thousands of high-quality sounds. A band doesn't need to hire an orchestra anymore. They can bring that entire sound library with them in one little box.
That idea of packing everything into one box
Right.
leads us right to modern multi-effects pedals, instead of a long, messy chain of 15 different pedals.
A guitarist just has one single unit on the floor, and that one portable device can contain hundreds of different digital amp models and effects.
How can it handle so much at once?
It's because they're built around those powerful DSP chips, the digital signal processors, that can run dozens of high-quality effects at the same time with basically zero lag.
So a player can go from a clean acoustic sound to a crunchy rhythm to a screaming solo with just one click, all from a box that fits in a backpack.
Yep. And they usually have a tuner built in, and critically, they can connect to a computer. So you can download new sounds or share patches you've made with other musicians online. A pro stadium-ready rig is now truly portable.
Finally, let's just wrap up by looking at the recording process itself. Recording digitally is so different from old magnetic tape. When music is recorded as a digital file, engineers can actually see the sound waves on a computer screen.
And that visibility gives them an insane amount of control. They can zoom in and use a mouse to edit the tiniest details, like cutting out a tiny sniffle or, more commonly, moving a drum hit by a few milliseconds so it's perfectly on the beat.
Something that was physically impossible with tape.
Structurally impossible. And the stability is key. A digital recording never degrades. You can make 1,000,000 copies, and every single one sounds exactly the same as the original master file. It's a huge win for just preserving music.
And looking forward, where is this all heading?
Well, the tech is evolving so fast, we're already seeing AI that can analyze your playing style and suggest the best effects to use, or even generate a bass line that fits with the drum track you just recorded.
So things like virtual reality concerts or instruments you control with movement aren't that far off.
Not at all. But what really stands out is that technology hasn't replaced the energy of rock. It's just amplified it and made it available to everyone. It allows students today to mess around with studio-grade sounds on a device they already own.
And it's that access that guarantees the next generation of rock musicians will be the ones to invent the next big digital sound. Digital technology has made the sound of professional rock music accessible, consistent, and endlessly customizable for musicians all over the world.
Now, going